God of War 2018 has no story. While there are events that play out from start to inevitable finish, an actual story has structure and it has purpose. In the process of creating a narrative, what one needs to do is follow a baseline or a standard. Now, there's any number of standards one may follow. For instance, the 3-act structure popularized by screenwriter Sid Field. The value in such storytelling has also led to its utilization across many films and plays, and its history stretches as far back as Aristotle's dramatic theory. 3 acts, beginning, middle, and end. Setup, confrontation, and resolution. Simple, right? And with regard to these established standards, one need not look too far into God of War 2018 to determine that the game has no structure whatsoever. Throughout its 20-plus hours of playtime, the game is laden with a hefty amount of information and a collection of cutscenes that play out from beginning to end. But no real effort is made to construct much of anything except a starting point and an ending point. Beyond the question of structure also is the question of purpose. Structure, in and of itself, is built purposefully like bones in one's body. But what are bones without flesh, blood, and the organs surrounding them? God of War 2018, or what I shall hereby refer to as Nu-GoW for the sake of clarity, does have semblances of structure, but ultimately falls apart due to numerous factors I shall hereby talk about in extended detail. And so I'll endeavor to point out various instances where dialogue and other essential narrative elements are poorly written as the game trudges along. And just so I'm being fair, I'll also remark on what elements, if any, work in favor of a well-written story. Now first let us acknowledge the fact that this game is using Kratos, the long-standing protag from all God of War games to date. As we know, by the end of God of War 3, Kratos died, felled by his own hand. Now there's catharsis in Kratos killing himself at the end of God of War 3 given all the destruction he had wrought, which, to say the very least, had left Greece in utter shambles. And while true, the Greek gods were made out to be tyrants and degenerates, you, the player, nevertheless are made to play a character who ought to be hated in his own right. And even if by some measure one might try to justify Kratos' actions throughout the games, one cannot deny the result brought about by the end of God of War 3, a world brought to absolute ruin. This is the whole reason as to why the ending of God of War 3 worked so well. It brought the story to a bittersweet resolution. Kratos' final act is one of heroism. He runs himself through, rejecting Athena's bid to consume the power of hope, and instead, Kratos releases the power of hope back into the world, and Athena ultimately loses. Ideally, this is how things should have been allowed to end. But, unfortunately, the writers still had the audacity to leave the door open for more sequels. Now, Kratos suffers from a curse, and no, I'm not talking about the one inflicted upon him by the goddess Athena, rather one inflicted upon him by the God of War fanbase. Namely, Kratos is popular, he's recognizable. The nostalgia associated with him isn't necessarily why he has returned in Nu-GoW. In a certain sense, Kratos has been isekai'd. Now, obviously, the Nu-GoW setting differs from the standard anime isekai, but the thematic values within isekai remain very relevant to Kratos' situation. Not only is Kratos still a god, but he also boasts a warrior's savvy that gives him a distinct advantage as he's been symbolically reincarnated within a world of Norse myth. Compare Kratos' situation to, say, the Dragonborn from Skyrim, for we don't know where the Dragonborn comes. He or she simply wakes up in a wagon led to an execution. Essentially, the player character is a fish out of water, allowed to imprint whatever backstory one wishes and follow through with whatever actions proceed from that point on. But with Kratos, the writers have a cushion to fall back on. Kratos isn't a scrappy farm boy biting at the heels of a galactic empire, for instance. Rather, he's a hardened warrior who has seen and experienced much throughout his lifetimes. And he was once worshipped as a god. He still is a god. So on the one hand, one can see safety in using Kratos to market this product, Nu-GoW. Yet in the long term, I suspect this will only serve to damage who and what the character is to a lot of fans. But perhaps as Rian Johnson had attempted with the Star Wars franchise, so too have the writers done here. Destroy their main character and divide the fan base in the process. Self-evidently, Kratos is the main character because he has a former establishment and popularity. He's recognizable, as I said before. Placing him in Norse myth might also be seen as an obvious choice, given the successes of such games as Skyrim, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Hellblade, to name a few. And even games like World of Warcraft have also included their own references to Norse myth. Even so, while the game most certainly capitalizes on these trends, there's certainly more to a story than its setting. Is there more to this game than simply using popular characters and trending topics? What exactly have the writers attempted to achieve by guiding the player from game's open to inevitable close? Well, let's start at the beginning. Nu-GoW opens with Kratos felling a marked tree, and as he does so, the cloth strung about his left arm becomes loosened. There's a heavy string of music that plays that he even seems to listen to for a moment before he reapplies the cloth to his arm. We're starting early, but this is a heavy beat made solely to remind you, the audience, that this man once wielded the blades of chaos, and so he's obviously still haunted. But the amount of blatant emphasis this moment receives is important to note because this is how the rest of the game will conduct itself as far as its supposed story elements are concerned. You know, there are some narratives that ham-fist elements into you, but Nu-GoW prefers to take a hammer and pound the entire hawk right into your face. Ultimately, what this will go to show is how stupid the developers think their audience is, and thereby reduce subtlety to a near nil. They don't want you to miss anything. And this aspect may be further attributed to how brain-dead the puzzles in the game are, but here I'll focus more on the narrative elements. Anyway, the tree is to be added to a funeral pyre for Faye, Kratos' late wife. With the help of his son Atreus, Kratos will soon burn her remains. Now, after the body is set alight, Atreus notices his mother's knife, and he attempts to retrieve it from the pyre while still hot. Strange, why was the knife even there if it held that kind of sentimental value? Why wouldn't Atreus have pocketed it before the body was set on fire? Perhaps Kratos had put it there without Atreus' knowledge. But rather than speculate about all that, let's look at what the scene means and why it was set up this way in the first place. It's symbolic, but promoted in a rather overt manner. Now this causes Atreus to burn his hand, but Kratos dresses the wound and allows his son to keep the knife. Now there's a lot of attention drawn to this knife, and what it represents is the expectations that both Kratos and his late wife have imposed upon their son. That all being said, consider what a knife is, thematically. A knife or dagger is often associated with deceit and betrayal. Julius Caesar, for instance, was stabbed multiple times by Roman conspirators, all wielding daggers. We also know that rogues and assassins in many RPG games often wield smaller blades as well. And coincidentally, Loki from the Marvel comics also wields a pair of daggers. And so on the face of it, Nu-GoW's writing is being deconstructive. It's taking classic elements in storytelling and breaking them down. A knife or dagger, a deadly implement associated with deceit and betrayal, is to be used otherwise. Now, deconstructionist narratives can lead to some excellent storytelling, and we can see this in such games as Planescape Torment or Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. Even Fallout New Vegas may be seen as a deconstruction of sorts. And yet while all those games seek to understand those elements within their deconstruction, I'll hereby argue that Nu-GoW attempts to deconstruct things for the sake of being subversive, and that's about it. And so after the funeral, the father and son go hunting so Atreus can prove himself ready for action. And there the game then obliges itself to unravel the nature of Kratos and Atreus' relationship. The father is cold and strict, while the son is naive and apprehensive, and Atreus' shortcomings make themselves readily apparent during the hunt.
There it is!
Hold! What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire! Only fire when I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
On the face of it, what Kratos means here is that Atreus needs to learn how to hunt better, to be a more proficient survivalist. However, that sentiment takes on a dual meaning when we learn that by better, what Kratos really means is for his son to be a better person than he is. Anyway, they continue looking for the deer, and after a time they run into some Draugr, which Kratos dispatches quite easily. And here Atreus mentions...
Draugr? They've never come this close to our woods before.
Keep moving.
And here I question the consistency of what Kratos wants here. He's supposed to be concerned about his son's well-being and readiness, but then he ignores Atreus' comment about this anomaly. Moreover, Kratos neither takes the time to converse with his son about this particular oddity, nor does he decide to abandon the hunt given this new and alarming threat. And so, the hunt resumes.
You went to the old temple, but Mom told me never to go in there.
We do what we please, boy. No excuses.
This line doesn't follow at all. The very fact that they're on a hunt is due to the fact that this is what Faye wanted, and Kratos even says that later on.
I went hunting with Mother a bunch of times. She never wanted to take me. Why now?
It was her wish. And it was time.
Okay.
So what's all this about doing what we please, as if Faye's warning to Atreus to steer clear of this temple was somehow incorrect? Now this moment is brief and the instance of dialogue may seem innocuous, but what it goes to show is that the writing isn't following its own logic at times. Now these instances are everywhere, by the way, and I'm almost certain that when people have played through the entirety of the game, they'll tend to forget they even happened given their brevity. But these instances do exist nevertheless, and they're all part of what render the game's semblance of a narrative inconsistent. Now at long last, Atreus manages to hit the deer with one of his arrows, wounding the animal. And then, at Kratos' behest, Atreus proceeds to stab the animal with his knife. And this is part of the deconstructionist narrative I had mentioned earlier. The knife is being used in the service of providing food for Atreus and his father. And there's a somber moment here. Atreus feels bad about killing the deer, but nevertheless accepts it as necessary. And Kratos reaches out as if to comfort him. However, he backs off at the last minute. Now this is fine, one can clearly see Kratos truly does care for the boy, but at the same time he doesn't want to coddle him or make him feel too comfortable. And while I may concede here that this is fine, this moment's sentiments are repeated time and again throughout the game, to the point of being obnoxious. Now the somber atmosphere is broken quite suddenly by the arrival of a large troll. So somehow, despite its size and its heavy breathing, neither dad nor boy could hear this thing as it approached them. And this is one of many points where the cinematic experience the game has going for it overrides the practical nature of the current scene. I'll endeavor to point out more of these as I continue with my analysis. Anyway, Kratos and Atreus do fight the troll, and the creature proves formidable. Thankfully, however, we learn that the boss has a health bar. The game generously makes that fact readily apparent to the player. Very essential information indeed. Dad and boy kill it in due course. And after the creature falls, Atreus is made to wail upon its corpse in semblance of a madman. And so, naturally, Kratos is made to discipline his son. Now here one might argue that Atreus slashing at the corpse is purposeful. He's essentially abusing his mother's dagger given to him by his father, right? But that's not the point. The problem isn't with the thematics here, it's with their execution. The tantrum is supposed to be a mirror to Kratos' own nature, obviously, but that message is very forcefully thrust upon us, meaning the writers needed Atreus to get irrationally angry all of a sudden and start coughing, specifically to get a reaction from his father. And this is where the writing starts to show itself as being highly didactic. Atreus doesn't gain or lose anything here by slashing at the corpse, he just causes a scene, and so must be reacted to. This scene could have and should have been better constructed. The way I picture it, it's not the troll but Atreus who initiates the fight. That's what should have happened. Atreus wounds the deer, and as it flees, it's captured by the troll, and that enrages Atreus as he sees the brute begin to feast on his prize. And of course, Kratos tries to calm his son down, but Atreus ignores him and fires angrily at the troll. And the fight ensues as per normal, and the troll is defeated. After that, Atreus revels in the victory, only to be scolded by his father for jumping the gun. Anyway, that's how I would have written the scenario. And the whole purpose of this would be to give Atreus some agency in his decision-making. His actions would be rash, but in his mind warranted given the situation. And as a result of this encounter, Atreus would be given insight and appreciation for the creatures of these harsh lands. Creatures seeking to survive, much like he and his father are doing by going on a hunt. And this too would contribute to Atreus' desire to become stronger, and as his father told him, be better. Now, another thing to note here is that after the troll is defeated, its body summarily vanishes. Now, one may wave this away as the video game reducing on-screen clutter. And that is a problem the way I see it, because much of what Nu-GoW is constitutes a cinematic experience, caught within a single camera shot. And in light of the fact that many may see this as a concession for the elements of a video game, I'd argue why the game didn't just cause the body to vanish off-screen in order to be more immersive. And juxtapose this with that serious moment we just had between dad and boy. That dramatic tension is broken all of a sudden, as this giant beast that Atreus was wailing on moments ago just turns into ash, almost like it was some demon the Doomslayer just killed. And neither Kratos nor Atreus remarks on how odd that is. Now, for anyone thinking this line of criticism is unfair, realize that this game and its successor won several awards and have received high acclaim from a number of sources. One may even be led to believe that these games are absolutely perfect. The games have been praised for their ability to tell a story and their gameplay in general, but the problem there is that both of those elements are at odds with each other. The games try to have their cake and eat it too. Now, a point has been brought to my attention with regard to how games made over 20 years ago were attempting to merge story with gameplay, and somehow even they managed this feat in ways far superior to modern games. Despite being praised for all its innovation, Nu-GoW doesn't truly offer a completely seamless gameplay experience, and instead wants to be more of a movie than it wants to be a game. Now compare this to a game like Half-Life, where what amounts to cutscenes would play out, but you're still in complete control of the character. In other words, it's not a movie. And if you're assuming my comparison to Half-Life is arbitrary, be aware that Cory Barlog specifically cited Half-Life as direct inspiration for God of War's current trajectory.
They are the originators of having no cinematics, right? And that affected me so strongly that even with God of War, what I wanted was no camera cuts, but also no cinematics. I wanted you to be able to be, in a room with 10 people, and I want to pay attention to that person, right? And if I don't pay attention to the other 9 people, I might miss something. That's really hard. It's really cool to talk about, but I could see how they had to engineer certain tricks at the time.
Now, Half-Life achieved its ability to merge gameplay and story together thanks to the limitations of the technology at the time. The limitations meant that developers had to get even more creative with the process in order to make everything work. Coincidentally, this is one of the main elements that Half-Life is remembered for. Now you compare this with modern games, but Nu-GoW in particular, and the technology is far superior, yet the developers decided to split the medium in two, often taking control away from the player during these lengthy cutscenes, where the game essentially becomes a movie. And so where Half-Life was able to strike a balance 20 years ago, for whatever reasons the developers of Nu-GoW decided to be less than creative. Anyway, the pair of them head home, and when they get there, Atreus asks several relevant questions that should concern Kratos.
But why would a fire troll burn Mother's garden? And since when are Draugr so close to the house? And what was that frozen thing that attacked them?
I do not know. Now be silent. We are almost home.
Note, this is the second instance where Atreus has remarked on something anomalous, and Kratos, for whatever reasons, has decided not to take any of it into heavy consideration. After that, Kratos gathers his wife's ashes. Or supposedly he does. You see, the camera zooms in so we can't really see much here, but what's remarkable is that the pyre left a ton of ashes, and what he collects is a really small amount he puts in his handheld bag. But here you have to wonder, isn't a bunch of his wife still there amidst all the trees he just burned? Why did he think that was a good idea in the first place? Maybe it's the thought that counts, I don't know. Anyway, the next conversation between Dad and Boy has Atreus trying to justify the fact that he lost control.
You lost control.
That thing was trying to kill us. It's not like you don't get angry in a fight.
But he was stabbing an already dead troll, so why would he justify... But that doesn't follow. See, here I suspect what the writers intended somehow didn't match what happened in the game for whatever reasons, and that's just me being generous. Otherwise, this scene just exists to create drama between Dad and Boy. Now, Kratos then provokes Atreus into getting angry to prove a point that the boy is still very weak and might even be sick. But then at that moment, the two of them are visited upon by a bearded man. After telling Atreus to hide underneath the house, Kratos then heads outside to meet this man. Now, the man taunts Kratos for no real reason and speaks very cryptically. The crypticism, however, is largely due to the writers forcing a confrontation, very pointedly withholding revelatory information. And so everything this man says is conveniently misconstrued by Kratos in order to justify the upcoming fight, while at the same time leaving the audience in the dark as to what's really going on. In other words, a mystery box!
What are stories but mystery boxes?
Now, this is one of the most glaring flaws in the writing here and hinges on Kratos simply not asking any relevant questions or trying to figure out anything about what's really going on. The stranger says,
I thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you?
What do you want?
Oh, you already know the answer to that.
And Kratos doesn't simply ask him what he means or engage in any method of conversation that would otherwise clear up what is an obvious misunderstanding, including, by the way, Kratos asking for this stranger's name. You see, an easy follow-up to,
Oh, you already know the answer to that.
would be, no, I seriously don't know the answer. Who are you, and why are you here? But you see, that would ruin the surprise. So, Kratos needs to be stupid and scant. And something else to consider on that point is the fact that when Kratos fought the troll earlier, the game gave you the troll's identity, even though Kratos doesn't actually know who the troll is. So, why does the game then call this man the stranger?
Anyway, blows are soon traded, leading to a battle that tears up the entire countryside. And apparently, this stranger is unnaturally strong, and his body is capable of regenerating itself from any damage inflicted upon it. And just in case that wasn't made abundantly clear by the visuals, the stranger also has to tell Kratos over and over and over again that he's immune to pain.
Throw whatever you have at me. I'll keep coming. That old body will give out. But before I end this, I want you to know one thing. I can't feel any of this. You can't hurt me. Nothing can. I feel nothing.
So do you get it now, folks? Do you get it? He's immune to pain. Should I repeat that again? He's immune to pain. Do you get it now? Do you get it? Yeah, in fact, this guy repeats this a number of times, almost as if the writers believe the audience would not get it the first time. One supposes that the writers might have thought the players far too stupid, and so necessarily repeated this line of dialogue over and over just to beat it into our dumb heads. But I'm sure this will be the last instance of the writers treating their audience this way. Wink. Anyway, as the fight continues, it eventually leads to Kratos snapping the man's neck, seemingly killing him. Now, the entire fight is quite the spectacle. The two men cause a great deal of collateral damage. However, it's one of those fights where in the end you wonder what it really takes to kill either party. And yet we are made aware that the stranger is immune to pain, he can heal his injuries, but it is the neck snapping that finally disables him. This as opposed to having a tree thrown at him, being impaled by another tree, having an entire stone pillar dropped on him, and even Kratos slicing him a number of times with an enchanted axe. And of all of this damage, apparently the neck snapping is what does him in. And now, after the entire fight is over, Kratos starts asking those relevant questions.
Who was he? He knew me. Did he know my past? How did they find me after all this time?
Yeah, this is what should have been tabled between you and the stranger beforehand, Kratos. And what's more, he says this as well.
Faye, what do I do? Our son is not ready. And neither am I. I do not know how to do this without you.
Now, if one has played the earlier God of War games, one most certainly may question why Kratos' dialogue has been tailored in this fashion, because it would be completely out of character for him to say these things. And even if we grant that throughout the series Kratos has relied on others for information, for direction, for aid, when did he ever pout or moan when such help was no longer there? No, Kratos was always a stoic. He was proud. And so this "oh, woe is me" moment doesn't remark well on a former Spartan whose ability to adapt gave him an edge over the entire Greek pantheon and then some. And so he would never have been made to cry about not knowing what to do without his wife guiding him. Anyway, the long and short of what Kratos says here is that he's voicing his fears that his home is no longer safe, and so he tells Atreus to go pack his things. Now the plan here is for them to go on a quest to fulfill the last wish of Faye, Kratos' late wife. Namely, they want to have her ashes scattered from the top of the highest mountain of all the 9 realms. But the problem with Kratos committing himself to this mission right now is that it does not coincide with their latest issue. While the stranger's attack does spur the Protag 2 action in this case, the attack itself, as far as Kratos is concerned, was completely arbitrary. And so at this juncture, the expedient course of action would have been for Kratos to have found another refuge for himself and the boy. Instead, for whatever reasons, perhaps Kratos read the script, he is then compelled to go climb a mountain and take his son with him. An act which one suspects would only make him even more of a target for whomever was looking for him. And by the way, the problem is also compounded by the fact that his wife's dying wish is not on a set timetable. It's not like the ashes are going to expire. And furthermore, the game has not yet established any link between Faye and this stranger. This might have been different if, say, Faye had left more specific instructions for Kratos to follow. And furthermore, the stranger could have established himself more formally, in turn becoming a far more interesting antagonist, rather than this thug. As things stand, what seems to be at odds with all these elements is the writer's desire to turn this game into a mystery box. Therefore, what we're left with here is the idea that Faye left her husband and her son to chance, all the while this stranger, who happens to be tied to Faye, has his dialogue made needlessly cryptic. Regardless, I want to return to the topic of narrative structure. At this point in time, one may argue we have something that resembles a setup block, or the first act of the narrative. We're allotted 2 main characters, 2 protags, Kratos and Atreus. and their main objective is made clear. They want to climb a mountain and fulfill the dying wish of Faye, Kratos' late wife. And supposedly the purpose of this climb is that it will serve as Atreus' coming of age, in addition to strengthening the bond between father and son. And what compels that climb up the mountain is the arrival of this stranger, Baldur. In effect, Baldur's attack is the inciting incident, a means of motivating the characters to take action and move the narrative forward. Even so, the inciting incident occurring arbitrarily will call into question what will later be answered in the climax. Now, this problem is a bit complex, so let's elaborate further. The protag's call to action must necessarily be framed in terms of the antag's movement against him. Note that regardless of Baldur's attack, we know that Kratos and Atreus were already set to carry those ashes up a mountain anyway. To make a comparison, we know that Luke Skywalker in Star Wars wanted to join the fight against the Empire, even without his learning about the Death Star, the Princess, or his father. However, his call to action is firmly initiated when he sees the scorched bodies of his aunt and uncle. Therefore, Luke is spurred to action. His vendetta is something we can also live through vicariously, rather than just generally. Now in Nu-GoW, Kratos and Atreus want to climb a mountain and scatter some dust, and that's a commitment they had made long before they were ever attacked by Baldur. But what's missing in this equation as compared to Star Wars is that we don't know anything about Baldur. Now in Star Wars, we saw Imperials assault a rebel ship, led by a looming figure who strangles a man before tossing his limp body against a wall. There we're given a picture of who the antags are and what they want. In Baldur's case, we have no idea what he wants, and his dialogue is purposely written that way. And what's even more outrageous to consider here is that Kratos doesn't even pose that question in the first place. He's not even curious. Why the game suffers from this is the fact that there's clearly a theme being played out to one extent or another. The theme is that of a parent-child dynamic, the tenuous relationship between Kratos and Atreus. And later on we'll also see that drama mirrored in the relationship between Baldur and his mother, Freya. There is a clear effort to draw a line of comparison between Atreus and Baldur as sons, and Kratos and Freya as parents. What I'm proposing is that this theme should have been initiated from the very beginning. In other words, well understood. Baldur should have been given a platform to be a proper antag, thereby giving us a clearer understanding of his own objectives as opposed to the protag's objectives. Keeping that in mind, what compels Atreus to action? Naturally, he wants to please his father and become stronger. Therefore, think about this. When Baldur arrives, his dialogue should have indicated that he was there on Odin's behalf. He wants to please his father and become stronger. There you'd have a proper antithesis for Atreus. Now imagine if one wills, Baldur arrives and he does parley with Kratos. He makes the case that he's trying to find a way to end the curse on his life and please the Allfather. Baldur then says he believes Faye is the key. But then Kratos informs Baldur that unfortunately he's already burned Faye's body. Now this upsets Baldur and he demands that Kratos give him the ashes. Naturally, Kratos refuses, and so Baldur is made to try to take them by force. All this gives reason to Baldur's actions, and makes him comparable to Atreus. Instead, however, Baldur is depicted as just a thug. Just some redneck from Asgard come to wail on a foreign immigrant from the south. Baldur is introduced to the story with no aim, no real goal, and as a result, has very little value as antag. Let's take another point of comparison, God of War 2. And the intro to the game wastes no time in setting up Zeus as a proper antag. After Kratos drops down on the city of Rhodes, he quickly discovers that he has been betrayed. While he initially believes Athena is to blame, the culprit does soon reveal himself to be Zeus.
You?
Yes, I am forced to attend to this matter myself.
Why? Why would you betray me?
It is you who would betray me. Am I to stand idly by while Olympus is threatened? Your hands are already stained by the blood of a god. I will not let Ares' fate be my own.
And so in God of War 2, Kratos serves the role of protag with his father Zeus as the antag. And why this dynamic works is that we know that both parties are set on fulfilling their respective roles as arrogant warring conquerors. Like father, like son.
You must vow to forever serve me.
I serve no one.
Then you'll leave me no choice.
A marked difference between these two, however, is that Zeus's actions are depicted as dishonorable. Rather than confront Kratos outright and up front, Zeus resorts to underhandedness and he deceives his son. The cowardice in this case marks Zeus as being antithetical to Kratos. And when Zeus makes his confrontation, he does so in a way that's actually meaningful. After draining Kratos of his powers, Zeus impales him with the blade of Olympus, before summarily casting him into the underworld. Zeus's intentions are made abundantly clear. and so the Antag claims victory during the initial encounter with the Protag. And that's an imperative. The Antag must win within the first act, as the Protag's defeat will give him a reason to improve upon himself. He's given a reason to become stronger, strong enough to rise to the occasion and defeat the Antag within the third act. Now, how does Baldur compare with Zeus in this matter? Well, there's a major flaw in even calling Baldur an antagonist in the first place. Simply put, Baldur is defeated within the very first portion of the game, throwing things into a quandary. Now, one may argue an exception because Baldur doesn't die here, but that's not the point. By showing that Kratos is even capable of defeating Baldur, Kratos is therefore shown he can also successfully eliminate the game's primary obstacle within the final act. And in fact, the manner by which Kratos defeats Baldur here will be the exact method he will also use to defeat him in the climax. Now, one might argue here that it's not Kratos, but Atreus who must rise to the occasion. The story's about him, but Atreus isn't the one who fights Baldur. Plus, that begs the question what purpose Kratos serves in this story. Kratos' instance is as if Obi-Wan Kenobi never died in Star Wars and actually defeats and kills Darth Vader before he escapes the Death Star. Ultimately, Atreus stands to be robbed of a lot of agency since much of what his journey constitutes is knowing his dad will circumvent anything and everything for him. But this just adds to what I said about Kratos essentially having been isekai'd. Like a great many isekai protags, Kratos has a skill set that sets him on an edge above most, if not all, the inhabitants of this new world that he has traveled to. Everyone else can only hope to catch up to him. And while he may openly bemoan not being ready to go forward, just remember, he says that amidst regenerating from his own wounds just as Baldur had. The man might as well be invincible. Supposedly, we have entered the second act at this point, although we're not even an hour into this game. One might even suggest we haven't even entered the second act, but the problem with that is that we've established all the points required to bring an Act 1 to a point of transition. Namely, we know who our main characters are, what opposes them, what their mission is. There's nothing else really required here. The truth about all that is why I began this video saying Nu-GoW has no story, because much of what we're about to walk into is just a jumbled mess of one event falling into another in semblance of a and then this happens and then that happens manner of progression. There's no real structure beyond this point, just stuff that happens and takes up 20 plus hours of gameplay and cutscenes. Speaking for myself, I'm very skeptical when anyone nowadays tells me straight up that something has a good story, because I know what they're really saying is that the medium was popular, or it received great acclaim, or maybe it left one satisfied by the very end. And I'm not saying the game leaving the player satisfied is a bad thing, rather one should not conflate good storytelling with one's own sense of satisfaction. But very often I believe that is what people do. But the problem as I see it is satisfaction is all there is to it. Nobody ever talks about structure anymore or about purpose in storytelling. And so all they ever see is a story about a series of arbitrary events strung together. But in reality, a story is far more than that. And people telling stories ought to hold themselves to much higher standards than what we're seeing here in Nu-GoW. Now, this video series will continue at some point in time, but I do have other projects to attend to, and I do not intend to make this a long-form essay. Beyond that, I also want to thank the following: Legacy, Gingaman Prime, and Ken Kaneki. You've all been extraordinarily helpful in solidifying my own thoughts and feelings about this game, and for that, I am extremely grateful. And for all my viewers, if you want to help invest in my content, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty Cheese Knife. I also have a Patreon, and I use Cash App, both of which function like online tip jars. For my viewers out there, I want to thank you all for watching, and I recommend you stay tuned for more content down the road. Until next time, be adequate.